Hello all, welcome to this first web series of the month from NGO We-Listen. I'm Suzy Singh, advisory to the board, mental health coach and author of the book 7 Karma Codes. We-Listen has a dual aim of creating awareness about mental health while simultaneously lending support to young people who are suffering from its impact. It is also committed to breaking the taboos and shame associated with it. At We-Listen, we are striving to create virtual spaces where people can talk about their feelings, emotional pain, and distress openly without any constraints and receive inputs and guidance from experts. This month, We-Listen brings to you a fantastic web series on the topic adolescent to adulting challenges with two very interesting webinars. And if you haven't already registered for them, I would urge you to do so. Today, we have a very interesting subject, a very interesting topic, and an even more accomplished guest speaker to help us through this. How to improve relationships between parents and teens. And our guest speaker today is Donna Volpitta, who is based in New York. As founder and education director of Pathways to Empower, Donna Volpitta loves to make the brain science of resilience and mental health easy to understand and apply. Her resilient mindset model, which draws on the latest research in neurology, psychology, and education, has been applied to areas of leadership from parenting to corporate management. Donna is also co-author of the book, The Resilience Formula, a guide to proactive, not reactive parenting, author of Neuroworld, a guide for teaching the brain science of resilience, and co-creator of the Nametags Education Program. Dr. Volpitta is a former classroom teacher with experience in both general and special education. She holds a doctoral degree in learning disabilities from Teachers College, Columbia University, and is the mother of 4 teens. So with this very, very accomplished introduction, I'd like to hand over the stage to our dear guest, Donna. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. And I so appreciate the introduction and love the work that you're doing. I think that it is so critical that we begin to address mental health. We were seeing an increase in mental health issues throughout the world before the pandemic began, and now we're really at a point where we need to address this. We need to begin to understand how we can address these issues, particularly in our adolescent population. One of the things that I like to say to people to try and get them to understand where adolescents are coming from is that just like age, being over 65 is a risk factor for the physical health issues associated with COVID-19, being an adolescent is a risk factor for mental health issues. And that comes down to the brain science. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today as to why that is. So understanding the brain is really such a foundation in understanding how we can work with our teens. So let's see whether this is going to work for me. And there we go. And you gave a great introduction. Thank you. I just want to emphasize a couple of things. I am an educator by trade. I'm going to be talking about the brain science. Everything that I talk about has been worked through with neuroscientists, but I am not a neuroscientist. I consider myself a translator. We know so much about the brain and so little of it is useful because in neuroscience, it becomes so complex. When we read a neuroscience journal, it gets very thick and complex, and typically people are not going to take that information and use it. So what I really consider myself is a translator. So I've taken that neuroscience that's really, really complex and made it incredibly easy to understand. So everything that we're going to be talking about today is very simple to understand and apply to your everyday life. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is I am going through this right now. I'm the mother of 4 teens. I have a 14, 16, 17, and 19-year-old, 2 boys and 2 girls. And it's difficult. I come here with the feeling so incredibly lucky that I understand the brain science, that I have this foundation for how I interact, but I struggle with this every single day. That it's negotiation, it's figuring out day to day how to respond. And I think that understanding the brain science gives an incredible foundation for that, and understanding how to make informed choices. But nothing is easy. It is difficult, and adolescence is not just teen. We'll learn that in brain science, the brain starts with the childhood brain, moves to the adolescent brain, and the adolescent brain is a very particular time period where there's a lot of change. There's a very big focus on moving towards the more efficient and more contained adult brain, but there's a lot of change that that the brain goes through during that time. And neuroscientists believe that that time period has doubled, that it used to be that the adolescent period of the brain was from 13 to 20. It's now from about 10 or 11 to about 25 to 27. So that time period of volatility has actually expanded. And so understanding that period is very, very important to the brain. And third, I am a mental health advocate. That is my focus. So that is the background with which we'll be talking. Sorry about that. So as I said, the adolescent period of the brain is extremely important. It is where we're changing. It's that transition from the childhood brain to the adult brain. And it's an incredible age of opportunity. It's also an incredible age of risk, because the brain is wired for that period to really go through transitioning. And there are a couple of major jobs that are happening during that time. The first is that we're sort of organizing our brain to be more efficient. So we're going through what we call pruning and paving. We're taking all the neurons that we have, we're pruning away the ones we don't need, and we're paving the neural pathways that we have created. So every time we have experiences, our neurons fire. That creates these neural pathways. So if you think about the brain during adolescence as kind of under construction, it's deciding which of those neural pathways are important, which ones aren't, which ones do we get rid of. So it becomes this age of risk, because the brain is focused in on becoming more independent. So the 2 things that are really, really focused in adolescence, one is to become more efficient, and the other is to become more independent. And that kind of pushes us towards that risk. Our brains are wired to have those more risky behaviors and seek out some of those neurochemicals, that adrenaline rush. So there are certain things about that adolescent period that are really focused on going and taking some of those risks, going and doing things independently, pushing our families away a little bit so that we can move towards our peers. The whole idea of the brain is that it's wired to become more independent. So if we think about this COVID-19 period, everything about what that adolescent brain is focused on doing, we are squelching, because they can't go out. They can't go take risks. It's very, very different in terms of the risk with COVID around than it is with the risk before COVID, pre-COVID. And so when we're keeping our adolescents at home, when we're asking them to do things that go against their brain, that's very, very difficult. for them to do. And it's a struggle. So for us to understand that, it's also an age of opportunity. The adolescent brain is more creative. They're just incredibly able to be creative and think differently because their brains are changing so much. It's a period that pushes their creativity. It's a period that pushes who they are and who they're becoming, and for them to explore that. And so for us, sometimes we don't really understand what they're going through with that. And how their creative minds are thinking differently than ours. One of the things that I like to say is adolescence is a period that is almost like a butterfly in a cocoon. That if you think about the childhood brain, that's kind of the caterpillar. We think about the butterfly and the cocoon, that's kind of the adolescent period, and then the butterfly is the adult. So if you see a butterfly in a cocoon, and they're struggling and they're moving their wings and they're trying to get out of that cocoon, and it looks like they're struggling really hard to get out, and you decide, oh, okay, I'm going to help them out of that cocoon. And so you break the butterfly out of the cocoon, it will die because it doesn't have the ability to, during that time period in the cocoon, what it's doing is it's building up the strength in its wings to be able to fly as a butterfly. So all of that struggle, all of that difficulty breaking out of that cocoon is about building up the muscles in the butterfly's wings to be able to fly independently as a butterfly. Similarly, the adolescent period of the brain is the time period when adolescents need to build up those muscles for independence, need to build up those skills that they need in order to become independent adults. And I like to refer to that as what we call the 4 R's of adolescence, the systems that they need to have in place. They need to understand how to build healthy relationships. They need to find a healthy sense of reward. Like, what do they find rewarding? Where are they getting their dopamine? We like to say that neurochemicals that are so important to brain health are kind of like text messages to the brain that drive our behavior, that tell us what's important, that tell us what to do. So the system of reward is, where do we get that text message that says, wow, that feels good, do it again? So are we getting that in healthy ways? Are we getting that in ways that are good for us, that look at our long-term benefit? So we talked about the system of relationships, the system of healthy rewards, regulation. Are our adolescents able to regulate their own behavior, know when to delay gratification, know how to handle their own schedule, know how to do things for themselves? That's their system of regulation. They need to have opportunities to put that in place. And the last is the system, let's say, of resilience. How do they handle challenges? So in order to learn how to handle challenges, we need to handle them. So as parents, our job is to help them develop those, is to keep ourselves from breaking them out of that cocoon and give them opportunities to build those wings. But we also need to provide a root system. 2 of the most fundamental needs of the human brain are a sense of safety and a sense of autonomy. It's that push and pull. It's kind of the yin and yang here. We need to have that feeling of safety and security, and we need to have that ability to become autonomous. And that is what we are doing as parents, is to provide that sense of safety and security, those roots, and also provide that opportunity for autonomy, those wings, and give our children that opportunity to build up their resilience, to build up their sense of relationships, rewards, and regulation. So I find that it is really helpful to have some foundation for that, for understanding the decisions that we make. So I'm going to very quickly go through the resilient mindset model. This is a model that I created in order to help people understand how the brain naturally responds to challenge so that we can begin to use challenges as opportunities to build resilience. And it's called the resilient mindset model. There are three parts, there are three parts to the model. The first is the 4 S's of resilience, and you'll see those in the dragonfly's wings. And that explains our how we naturally respond to challenge, what brain pathways. The second is the 4 characters of the brain that you can see. Each of the characters represents a different part of the brain. And then the third is REACTS, which is an acronym for the social threats and rewards to the brain. So we're going to go through each one really quickly. The first is the 4S framework. I like to say that our resilience, our response to any challenge, good, bad, big, or small, is our resilience. And that response is guided by the way we think about 4 S's. Self, who are we? What do we stand for? Situation, how do I put that challenge into perspective and break it down into its doable parts? Supports, who do I go to ask for help? And strategies, what are the things that I actually do to handle that challenge? And our response is based on the way we think about those 4 S's. The interesting thing is the reality doesn't matter. I could have 10 supports to go to, but if I don't use them, it doesn't matter. So it's the way we think about them. So the 4 S's can be used as a framework. And this is really important when we're thinking about not breaking the butterfly out of that cocoon, that instead of doing things for our kids, we can use these 4 S's to question them and help guide them as they handle those challenges. So instead of doing things for our adolescents, we can say, hey, is your strategy working? What are you going to do to handle this? How are you going to do this? Can I help brainstorm that? Are there supports that you can go to? Let's break this down into the doable steps. What do we have to do first, second, and third? And work it through with them, because what we want to do is give them the ability to do this on their own. So we're guiding them, we're supporting them, we're scaffolding them, but we're not doing for them. So the 4 S's can be used to prepare for, handle, and reflect on any challenge. And when we do that, we're proactively building more resilient brain pathways. The second part of the model is the 4 characters of the brain. And I started coming up with this model when I read a book by David DeSteno called Out of Character. And he puts people into moral dilemmas. This is his job. He puts people into moral dilemmas and then tries to see how they respond. And at the end of the book, what he comes up with is that we think of decisions that we make as good versus bad. Our brains don't think in good versus bad. Our brains think in long-term versus short-term. Our brain's main job is survival. So there's a part of our brain that's in charge of our short-term decisions, the here and now, and there's a part of our brain that's in charge of the long-term decisions, things that are going to benefit us in the long run. So he said in his book that it's not like, an angel and a devil over the shoulder. It's not good and bad. It's long-term versus short-term. So instead of an angel and a devil, it's an ant and a grasshopper. And that comes from Aesop's fables. So we used those characters, and the ant represents the cortex of the brain in charge of long-term decisions, things that will benefit us in the long run, things like putting money in the bank, going to a doctor, things that we may not really feel like doing right now, but we know that they'll benefit us in the long run. So that's why we do them. That's that system of regulation of saying, don't feel like doing that, but it's going to benefit me. So I'll do it. I'll study for the test, even though I want to go to the party. The ant holds the tools of a healthy brain. When we have those in place, we are better able to make those long-term decisions. The grasshopper is in the limbic system, represents the limbic system, which is the emotional brain, the brain that's in charge of the here and now. So the grasshopper kind of wants to sit and watch Netflix and eat pizza. It's just kind of would be the one to say, let's go to that party instead of studying. So the limbic system is the emotional brain, but it's also in charge of getting us out of the way of danger. So the first version is the grasshopper ready to have fun. Second version is fight, flight, or freeze. it's the grasshopper getting us out of danger. So if we have a car coming towards us, the grasshopper is going to get us out of the way. So that's really, really important. Main job of the brain is survival. So the grasshopper is there to save us. The third version is, I talked about those neurochemicals being sort of guides for our brain, text messages telling us what drives our behavior. And I like to say that this visual represents the fact that self-esteem isn't a gift that we can give our kids. It's a neurochemical response we rob them of when we don't let them struggle towards success. So picture your teens really working hard towards a goal, and they're struggling, and it's hard and it's not fun, and they're struggling and they're struggling and they're struggling, and they finally succeed, and they get that feeling of, yes. We've all felt that. And that's a feeling, that's a burst of neurochemicals. That's dopamine, that's serotonin, that's oxytocin. It's all these really good neurochemicals that make us feel good. And that happens in the limbic system. And so that's why we have that representation, that we need to struggle in order to get that big burst of neurochemicals, because that's what keeps the brain healthy. The third character is the glowworm. And the glowworm represents the amygdala of the brain. It's part of the limbic system, but it's a part that's specifically looking out for danger. So the glowworm is always on alert for danger. Because our brain's main job is survival, the amygdala is one of the strongest parts of the brain, that it's able to always look out for danger. When it experiences danger, it goes into that red alert phase, that if we see a car coming at us, that third version, it goes red alert, calls out the grasshopper for fight, flight, or freeze. That middle version is when we're stressed, when we have a lot of cortisol, when we have a lot of stress going on, we might misinterpret something as a threat to survival that really isn't. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So it's important that the amygdala is there ready to save us. The amygdala's job is to call out the grasshopper, switch control of the brain from the ant to the grasshopper, get us out of the way of that oncoming car, because we wouldn't get out of the way otherwise. Last character is the dragonfly. The dragonfly has the 4 S's on the wings, and that is the job of the dragonfly is mindfulness and understanding when to override that glowworm, when to say, no, we've got this. We don't need to go into fight, flight, or freeze because we have these 4 S's in place. We know how to handle this situation. And often that is because of this last part of the model, which is reacts. A lot of people don't realize our brains respond the same way to social threats and rewards as it does to physical threats and rewards. So REACTS is an acronym for those social threats: respect, equity, alliances, control, territory, and similarity. When any of those are threatened, we also tend to go red alert and call out the grasshopper for fight, flight, or freeze, and have those short-term reactions. One of the ones that I will highlight there is control. Right now, with the pandemic, one of the things that triggers that response is that sense of feeling out of control, that we don't have control of what is happening right now. And so that becomes a much bigger trigger for people right now, is that feeling of I'm out of control. And a lot of mental health issues stem from a sense of feeling out of control. So just like when we had the car coming at us, the glowworm will switch control of the brain from the ant to the grasshopper, and we go into that fight, flight, or freeze. That happens with social threats as well. So that is the model altogether. There's a lot to it. A lot of complex brain science goes into that. It's important right now to also understand, I like to say that fight, flight, or freeze roughly translate to violence, anxiety, and depression. So we're seeing a lot of anxiety and depression. We're also seeing a lot of violence right now. So when we think about that fight, flight, or freeze mode, we think about going into that grasshopper mode. We are triggered right now to go into that grasshopper mode because we don't have that sense of control and security. So we're more likely to see that. And I like to say the opposite of anxiety and depression is not happiness, it's action. It's feeling like we have a sense of control and that we can act, that we have something that we can do in order to respond. It's also important to understand that when we go through trauma, and all of us are going through a collective trauma right now, COVID has been a worldwide collective trauma. What happens in the brain is that the glowworm gets stronger. We're more likely to react to things in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And the dragonfly actually gets weaker. Our ability to override gets weaker. So that prefrontal cortex, that area that says, no, we got this, actually shrinks. And the glowworm, the part that says we're in trouble, gets stronger. And that's because our brain's main job is survival. So we want to be able to react quickly. So what we can do in order to sort of combat that, to try and help what is happening with our brains right now, is first give ourselves a sense of control, make sure we have those ant tools in place, and make sure that we can have that so that we don't go into that fight, flight, or freeze as quickly. And the second thing is to build up that dragonfly. And there are two ways to do that. One is to build up those 4 S's. And the second is through mindful practice. Mindful practice, we hear so much about how mindful practice is so good for the brain. Well, here's why. It's like putting the dragonfly in the gym. It is building up those muscles when we actively have to switch from our different systems in our brain. It's difficult to pay attention to our breathing, pay attention to what's happening in the here and now. But what you're doing is you're proactively switching the brain and taking more control. And that gives the ability to override that glowworm and build up those muscles in the dragonfly. So it was a lot of information that I gave. I know that we wanted to have a lot of time for discussions. But I did want to give that background of the brain science because I think it's so powerful. Our programs have a lot more information and a lot more ability to actually take that brain science and more. We go a lot more into the neurochemicals. We go a lot more into the systems of the brain and brain development. And then we take that information and really apply it to mental health literacy and to brain-based leadership. So I tried to get the basics.
Thank you, Donna. That was absolutely brilliant. You're absolutely right. There is so much that you have shared with us, and I think presented in very memorable mnemonics through these beautiful figures that you've created. And it's almost like a story. If our children can understand what each of these characters stands for and try and receive their message, they'd be able to manage their minds so much better. I think this then leads me to the very important question of applying this knowledge that you shared with us. And you have 4 teens yourself that you share an absolutely wonderful relationship with. You've gone through the challenges of the COVID lock-ins being thrown together. Can you share with our audience some of the key tips or insights that you would recommend on building a harmonious relationship with the adolescents, given that the feeling of control is currently compromised?
I think, one of the things that I would hesitate with is I have a wonderful relationship with each of my children, but again, it's a long-term thing. I often, there are always going to be struggles. Yeah. There are always the brain, understanding that the brain is wired to have this volatile relationship sometimes, that it's okay. And one of the things I sometimes say when we get into these struggles is, hey, I'm in this for the long term. I've got my aunt here. I'm not in it for the moment. I'm not in it for you to like me right now. And that's okay if you don't like me right now. We aren't always going to have this wonderful, wonderful relationship because there is such a push. And sometimes it is important for them to feel like they can push against their parents, because one of the things I find is that in so many other aspects of their life, they're expected to do so much. They're struggling through always being on with social media. They're struggling through, particularly right now with COVID, just being so angry that they have to go through this. When we were in lockdown, and I know that India has had such a difficult time with lockdown, and I just spoke to a teen who is in lockdown in India this week, and she was saying it is so difficult to be home, and there tends to be this pushing against and anger at parents, and they know logically that it's not our fault, but we're the ones who are safe to get angry at. And this has been such a struggle. I know that one of my, the tenets that I've said time and time again as my kids have grown up has been, with privileges come responsibilities, with responsibilities come privileges. And I really, we try to give them as much freedom as we can, with them having the opportunities to be responsible. COVID shuts all of that down. You can't, and the way I explained it to my kids was that, just like you can't earn the right, the responsibility to the privilege of driving drunk, like as an adult, I can't earn that right because it puts somebody in danger. You can't earn the right during COVID to go out to a party. And they had friends who were. And so it becomes very difficult. One of the lines my daughter came back and said is, "Yeah, Mom, I get it. Just because I get A's in school doesn't mean I can kill grandma." And that really, that's how they can process that. And it sounds so, but it was so difficult. It's so difficult to have those conversations, because they realize what a difficult time this is. But it's going to be that give and take. It's going to be, sticking to certain, sense of control. Like, this is what you can do. This is what we can, whatever, privileges and responsibility and freedoms we can give them, it's important to give them right now. Whatever ways that we can let them go through that struggle, and how much freedom we can give them is really important right now, because they're feeling so stifled. And we had a lot of tough times where our kids were really, really angry at us. But it's okay, because in the long run, they will understand. So again, it's a lot of that understanding that some of this is grasshopper. It's short term. And if we can stay in that long term and give them that sense of control and security as much as we can, that's what we can do.
Yes, it reminds me actually of a dilemma as a parent. I remember when I had a very young child, and the option was to either tell them what to wear to school or give them the choice and say, well, you can choose between the red or the blue t-shirt. And then suddenly they felt they were in control. So I guess you're saying something pretty similar, which is, don't end up saying no to everything. Give them a few choices, a few privileges, and then they will feel a little bit more empowered and not so stuck.
Yeah, as much as we can, as much as, we're in a time period, and logically they understand that. My teenagers get it. They, adolescents get that they don't need to put people into danger, but it's still difficult.
The other thing that I find a lot of parents complaining about is that the kids have become pretty non-engaged during this period. Also, they are shut away in their own worlds, and parents fail to understand. They find it strange that they don't want to come and have chats with them, and they're in the house, but yet they want to just be on their devices and not have any conversation or bonding with the parent. How should the parents deal with this?
Again, it's a give and take. I think it's finding, when are you going to say, okay, we're all having dinner together tonight. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to have, so when are you going to have those conversations? And the other thing is and when are you going to let them be in their room? And they need that time. They need that independence. And right now, that's what they can do. A lot of adolescents, so much of their social life is online right now. And they need that. They need that peer interaction. They need that time to engage with their peers. And I have actually become a very big proponent of some of the video games and trying to understand and engage with our kids. So often we want them to engage with what we want to engage with, but learning about what are they doing online. One of the things that I've started doing a lot is engaging with my kids through GIFs, which are sending different visuals, and they laugh at me at what I send because apparently I don't send the right ones, but they it has been a bridge to some of those conversations, and knowing when to sort of give them some of that control. Like last night, my daughter said, I just need some alone time. And I said, okay, but I wanted to say goodnight to her and I wanted to have a chance to just connect right before bed. So I sent her a GIF that was just a little girl with big eyes looking up, and it said, "I'm outside your door." So I was giving her a choice.
Yeah.
And she did. She came out and she laughed at me, and we had a conversation to say and said goodnight. And but it's sort of, I guess, engaging with the way that they're engaging, learning their technology, and trying to have those conversations in a way that they want to have them.
I think that is a very powerful insight, because very often we just command them to align with us, but we are not willing to stretch ourselves to unlearn what we want to do and learn what they're interested in. So I think this is a marvelous insight. Enter into their world if you want to befriend them.
During the pandemic, we played a lot of Among Us, which is a video game that you play on phones. And my daughter was away, and then we were all home together and we would play Among Us. And then they got sick of that. But engaging, I've learned a lot about video games. I haven't gotten very good at playing them, but learning about them, asking about them.
Yes. But a lot of this has also led to reversed biorhythms and loss of daily structures, because a lot of these kids, like you said, that learning to regulate themselves is a very important skill that they're still in the process of learning. And I find a lot of teens are struggling with this regulation, because now they don't need to wake up and go to school in the morning. So they're sitting up all night chatting online, and then they sleep at 4 and 5 in the morning, and then they're just not aligned with the way the sun rises and sets. And this can alarm parents too, because they're not attending or paying attention to classes online. So how does one deal with this reversed biorhythm issue?
The funny thing is that adolescents' biorhythms are naturally misaligned with ours. The dopamine, the melatonin in an adolescent on average gets released 2 hours later than an adult. So their biorhythms are meant to go to bed later and get up later. But in regular times, when they had school, they didn't have that opportunity to go with their biorhythms. They were going with our biorhythms because we forced that on them. But it's a give and take in that. And I struggle with this as well, because they need to get enough sleep. I think that the technology is definitely interfering with their ability to sleep the way that they need to. And I have struggled with how much do you let them make that decision and how much do you influence that decision. And I think it depends very much on the student. And it depends very much on how much they need, and trying to talk to them about, it is important for you to get their sleep. They hear us talking. They may not always do what we want them to do, but they hear us. I think they can
Yeah.
and talking about, and I also think understanding that their brains do have a different biorhythm, but also knowing, okay, it's good for you to be on a regular schedule. So they hear us, how is it best that you can get to sleep? Because you do need that sleep, and understanding how important that is for the brain.
So your suggestion is just have friendly conversations, let them receive your guidance and leave it to them to learn to apply it or not to apply it.
Sometimes, I think sometimes it's also saying, no, you can't, sorry, you can't stay up. You need to go to bed now. It's knowing the give and take, and being able to recognize the signs of when are they overtired.
And this other feeling, this is kids who are not very extroverted, and they don't have very many friends that they can chat online with and socialize with. They seem to be suffering from a lot of loneliness and depression because the school life is all shut away.
Yes.
What would you recommend in those cases when children are showing signs of becoming withdrawn and they don't have very many peers that they engage with online?
I think if they could engage with a few peers, if you can help with that as much as possible, but then also, again, the opposite of anxiety and depression are action. So having coping mechanisms, so there are different coping mechanisms that people can do when they don't have something to do. So we have on our programs, we have a whole list, and you can look up different coping mechanisms. So, music or making sure that they're doing exercise. Exercise is, in fact, it hasn't been released yet, but there's a study that's just about to come out about the importance of exercise in terms of mental health. And they are looking at it now, that when someone is diagnosed with depression or anxiety, that they are recommending that exercise be prescribed, much like physical therapy is prescribed after an accident, that working with someone and making sure. I think one of the things that I emphasize most in terms of my kids is making sure that they're exercising every day at some point, doing something. That is, whether it's with me, but giving choices, but movement, exercise, getting out and doing stuff is important. So feeling like there is some sort of control over what's happening. The teen that I talked to the other day started a nonprofit. There are a lot of different, and that's Teen Mental Health Society. Is what she started. So if you look up Teen Mental Health Society, that's an open forum for teens. So encouraging your adolescents to get involved in something like that, because there are a lot of online forums that they can join. I know my son is involved in different Discords. He does 3D printing. So on YouTube and on different Discords, there are so many communities that are specific to different interests that people have, and you can join, and they're so incredibly supportive. I think that parents automatically, when they hear you're on an online chat, they think it's a horrible thing. And I think about the amount, how supportive this 3D Discord has been for my 14-year-old. It has been incredible for him to have these people who have the same interest, and they help each other learn how to do different things, and they support each other. And he said that, even when people are feeling depressed, they'll say, I'm really feeling down today. And everyone's like, hey, guy, you got it, and they're so supportive of one another. So even if they don't have peers, friends their age, encourage them to join certain Discords. Now, talk to them about internet safety. That's really, really important. I'm constantly talking to them about that. But there are forums out there that are incredibly supportive for adolescents. And we as adults are afraid of them. So we
Yes,
discourage
of
them
course,
from
because
doing it because we don't know them.
absolutely. A lot of parents are unaware that these platforms exist, that these technology options are available, and because they don't know about them, they seem helpless and don't know what to suggest. So I'm really glad that we're talking about these things so parents can have some ideas and learn and make these suggestions, because I think socializing is so very critical to feeling that you belong and in feeling that you want to engage with this whole purpose of life and living.
Yes. Yeah, there are a lot of forums out there, and I think it'll be interesting because one of my issues is that a lot of the discords don't start till late, but that kind of works in the time zone with with India.
Yeah.
You might get your kids on a better schedule.
Yes.
But they're talking to people all over the world. What an amazing thing.
Yes.
And we get so scared of it because we don't understand it.
True, true. You know, in the recent pandemic, Donna, there's also been a lot of loss of life. We've never seen this kind of a reportage of death and people passing away as we have in recent times. And I find that most often parents are so involved with their own grief and with the perhaps the arrangements about the death rituals and that process that follows, that they don't really address this issue with their adolescents who are anyway very withdrawn. But it affects them quite deeply, the loss of a grandparent or someone who is well known to the family. What is your advice in such cases?
You know, I think this is such a difficult question because we are dealing with it and understanding that that really triggers that grasshopper. It's the emotional part of the brain, and they feel it. Adolescents tend to be in that emotional part of the brain more than adults. It is where they are centered. And they are feeling this, and they may not want us to know that necessarily. I think one of the things is connecting at night when it is the absolute worst time for us, is probably the time that your adolescents are going to be most interested in connecting and sharing their thoughts and being able to sit with you. And you are more likely to get your adolescent to sit and talk to you at midnight than you are at any other or 2 in the morning. You know, that when it's most difficult for us, it's the best time to try and connect and try to understand their feelings and be there for them then. Sometimes we have to meet them where they are before they can meet us where we are. So I think that middle of the night is most likely the time that you're going to be able to connect and say and process through some of that loss and say it's okay to feel angry, it's okay to feel sad, and this is really hard. And I think there's a lot of, when we look at those social triggers for the brain, I think equity is a big one, and adolescents right now are feeling very much like this is unfair, and saying, I get it. Your grasshopper is feeling like it's unfair, and I think one of the things that we tend to do is if we're like, you know, we are so much luckier than you know, there are so many people going through such hard times, and you know, and we discount some of their pain, and it's real.
True.
Social pain is real, and feeling that loss is real. So letting them experience that is important.
You know, Donna, this is such an interesting and valuable conversation. And some of these insights, I don't think parents would have imagined that walking into their teen's room at midnight and sitting down with them is when their teen is most vulnerable and willing to open up. So I think this is absolutely great. And I wish we had a lot more time to discuss some of these issues.
Can I add one more thing?
Please do.
Because I think this is a really important point. Adolescent boys have a larger limbic system than adolescent girls. And one way to rebalance neurochemicals, I like to say that toddlers, when they tantrum, that is actually the brain proactively rebalancing neurochemicals, and it is healthy for the brain. And we get mad at them.
Yeah.
When people cry, that is a rebalancing of the cortisol. It's rebalancing neurochemicals to put your brain into a better state. It's very healthy for the brain to cry. It is probably most important for adolescent boys to cry. And societally, we don't let them. We get angry at them. And that is one of the most detrimental things that I think we can do.
You're absolutely right. In fact, yesterday I was doing a grief workshop with some very senior managers in a large tech organization. And one of the questions that was raised to me was exactly this. This senior manager asked me, we men struggle a lot. We can't give ourselves permission to cry. And a lot of men and managers are unable to cry. And they wanted some sort of guidance and help with regards to that. And while I explained the entire science about how tears are therapeutic because they contain chemicals that help them heal, but this is really interesting what you're telling me. And I'd like to know, is the adult male brain, is their limbic system also larger, or is it only in teenagers?
I think it's all male limbic systems are bigger than female limbic systems.
Then why is it, if the limbic system is connected to their emotional body, why is it that the only emotions that the men are most comfortable with is anger and fear?
Because we teach them that.
It is one of the things that I would really like to see change more than anything, because, you know, and I found myself struggling with that as a mother. You know, sort of my first reaction when my teenage boys started crying, I was like, what are you doing? And then I was like, what am I doing? What?
Yeah.
And I have found that it is incredible to let boys cry. Now, they don't do it openly and whatever, but really honoring that is important.
This is absolutely fantastic, Donna. And even though I have so many more questions that I would want to ask you, I can see that we are running out of time, but I will impress upon you to at least share one teeny little bit of advice about heartbreak in teenagers, because I think a lot of them suffer from heartbreak. And they, particularly in India, are very shy about sharing this openly with their parents. So do you have some quick advice for teenagers who are struggling with this?
Oh, I think the best that we can do is empathize and not minimize. Is devastating. Losing a relationship, heartbreak is, and I think honoring that, being with them and saying, you know, I think sometimes adults are like, oh, you know, well, he wasn't good for you anyway, or she wasn't, you know. I think all we can do is honor them and say, I am so sorry. It's difficult. It's hard. I'm so sorry that you're going through this. It is so, you know, because they're so in their limbic system, they do that. Social pain is pain. So we need to look at that when they go through heartbreak as just like they broke their leg. You know, it is real. And we can help them with those 4 S's. We can help them with what are ways that I can help you cope on this? Can we go out together and just go sit on the beach and not talk?
Yes,
or talk
yes.
if you want to, but honoring and letting them make those decisions. And that's so hard. I struggle with that stuff.
And I
How
think that's very beautiful, even if you don't have the words to support them, but be present in silence and hold the space for them so that they understand that they may have lost a valuable relationship, but there is another very, very precious relationship that will always be available to them.
Yes,
Beautiful.
you have to be their roots.
Yes, yes.
That's where the root system comes in.
True. And I love the way that you're helping us connect back and interpret those lovely visuals in your presentation. And I'm sure many of us will want to take a look at this recording at least a couple of times so that we can really make friends with all those, the grasshopper and the glowworms, and make that part of our language so that we can internalize it and then use it with the young ones. Thank you so much.
The other thing that I would say is that what's so important about this is having a common language. I love to tell the story. When my son was 6, I was talking to him. He was mad at me. I was mad at him. And I went to talk to him and he said, "Mom, I can't talk to you right now. I'm in grasshopper mode."
Oh, I love that.
That's why we need to have that power. We need to have kids have that language. We need to teach people. So we have programs that are for parents, educators, and we have students from kindergarten all the way up through adolescence, and we have corporate. So we have programs that mirror each other that have this language. So we want to get this into the schools. We want educators to begin to be able to teach mental health literacy so that all people can begin to talk about this and have these conversations in a way that is non-judgmental, that we can begin to break the stigma through people understanding the brain science.
So Donna, is there any website where people who may be interested in checking out your programs can visit online and find out more details about the programs you offer?
Yes, it's on the screen right now, pathwaystoempower.com. And we have a YouTube channel. We have a lot of resources, and my email is on the screen as well. So feel free to email me if you're interested in getting the programs into schools. That's one of our big goals, is having everybody have this common language.
Thank you so much, Donna. I think there has been just so much very valuable information that you have shared with us today. And particularly, I think it has enabled, for me personally, to understand in so much greater detail how we need this common language, and that how the common language itself can create more harmony between the parents and the children themselves. So I would really urge people to go check out the programs that Donna's mentioned. She's said her details are available here. And I so look forward to speaking to you again in the future, and maybe at a time when we are able to bring your programs into schools in India.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Donna. It's been absolutely wonderful.